Hey everybody, it's Amanda.
And Richard.
It's time for our evening Bible study. Hey. I just got the notifications.
We've done that like 100 times, 200 times, and every time I think something's just going to come to me, something to say, nothing ever does. Stop that.
Sorry.
Oh my. Contagious. Tell you, it got cold here where we are in North Carolina. And it's not freezing, but it's colder than it has been. It's kind of got a cold rain to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of been getting warm during the day.
Yeah.
Cold at night though. I keep thinking I'm gonna just turn the heat off, and then every time I turn the heat off, she's got a blanket she's got a blanket around her waist there, and she just covered me because I said I was cold.
Yep. It's like, you're cold. Here you go. You can share my little blankie here.
Yeah,
move your knee.
We just need some rocking chairs.
There you go. There we go. Now we're all warm. But it is chilly though.
I had a thought, and it's gone.
Hope you get it back before we get in the Bible.
Hope everybody's doing good. She brought it up to me earlier. The chapter we're doing tonight is very short.
It's only 11 verses.
Yes. We may be short tonight, short on time. I don't know. I don't know yet. I just don't know. Last night we went about an hour and a half, so we could go short tonight. I remember when I was in Bible college, every morning they would have a chapel service, which is really just a preaching time. Mm-hmm. They'd have a missionary, pastor, or an evangelist, or somebody come in to preach. And I remember when I was there that 2 days in a row that the school had a record. It was a missionary. He came in, and I cannot remember for the life of me where he was a missionary from. Not here. He's a missionary. He's far away. But he had an accent that doesn't help, but he did. He preached the longest chapel that the school had ever had. And I mean, not insane in some measure, but still, it was like almost 2 hours long. Mm. He just kept preaching. Mm-hmm. And they didn't give him a time limit. He just went 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And it was the longest chapel service they had at that school. Mm-hmm. It was followed up the very next day with the shortest chapel service they ever had. And neither one was planned. It just happened that way. Mm-hmm. One guy comes in, preaches the longest one they ever had. Next day, a different guy comes in. He wasn't there the day before. He was just a different preacher that they had asked to preach, and he came on in, and he preached about 20 minutes. So they went from 2 hours to 20 minutes, two extremes, two records. What am I saying? I'm saying last night we were an hour and a half, and tonight we may be, I don't know.
We'll see how it goes.
Half hour? 40 minutes?
We've already spent 4 minutes.
1 hour? We're going to be an hour and a half.
We'll see. All right. If you're ready, we can go ahead and read it.
First Chronicles chapter 28.
First Samuel.
I know. That's where I'm at.
First Samuel 29. And
Ruth chapter 4.
We're going to read the entire chapter. The whole 11 verses.
Somebody's going like, Rick's kind of weird tonight.
I know. He's tired.
I am a little tired, but I
He'll
usually
be very entertaining when he speaks.
I usually wake up during the live event.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to read the verses. I'll do a quick overview. Pass it to Rick. He'll be awake by then.
Excuse me.
He's going to drink his coffee. And then we'll talk about it. So if everybody's ready, 1 Samuel 29, starting at verse 1, it says, Now the Philistines gathered together all their armies to Aphek, and the Israelites pitched by a fountain which is in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines passed on by hundreds and by thousands, but David and his men passed on in the reward with Achish. Then said the princes of the Philistines, Why do these Hebrews here? And Achish said unto the princes of the Philistines, Is not this David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, which hath been with me these days or these years, and I have found no fault in him since he fell unto me unto this day. And the princes of the Philistines were wroth with him. And the princes of the Philistines said unto him, Make this fellow return, that he may go again to his place, which thou hast appointed him, and let him not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he be an adversary to us. For wherewith should he reconcile himself unto his master? Should it not be with the heads of these men? Is not this David, of whom they sang one to another in dances, saying, Saul slew his thousands, and David his 10,000s? Then Achish called David and said unto him, Surely as the Lord liveth, thou hast been upright, and thy going out and thy coming in with me in the host is good in my sight, for I have not found evil in thee since the day of thy coming unto me unto this day. Nevertheless, the Lord's favor thee not. Wherefore now return and go in peace, that thou displease not the lords of the Philistines. And David said unto Achish, But what have I done? And what hast thou found in thy servant so long as I have been with thee unto this day, that I may not go fight against the enemies of my lord the king? And Achish answered and said to David, I know that thou art good in my sight, as an angel of God. Notwithstanding, the princes of the Philistines have said, He shall not go up with us to the battle. Wherefore now rise up early in the morning with thy master's servants that are come up with thee, and as soon as ye be up early in the morning and have light, depart. So David and his men rose up early to depart in the morning, to return into the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Jezreel. Doesn't this make you just feel like David is just acting so foolish? Like, I have no words for it. So here we have David, who has at this point lived, I think the last count we had was 1 year and 4 months, but now Achish is saying years, right? So, but he's staying with the Philistines, Israel's enemy. And so the Philistines are gathered to go to battle with Israel, which is David's country, his family, his friends. Just, he's supposed to be their king. And rather than be there and be taking care of the people that God gave him responsibility for, he's gone off and now he's hanging out with Israel's enemy. It makes absolutely no sense. And he's not even just hanging out with them. He is actually prepared to go to war against them. I mean, it's just the absolute saddest thing. So, but here's the thing. He's aligned himself with Israel's enemy, forgetting the fact that he's an Israelite. But guess who didn't forget that? The Philistines. The king feels like he's gotten to know David and he's a good guy and he's going to stand by him. David seems prepared to do that. But the Philistines don't care how David acts. They will only ever see him as an Israelite, as they should, because that is in fact what he is. And so they do not want him going to war with them because they are concerned that when they go to war that he might turn on the Philistines. And he would, in fact, be a danger to them because they remember how dangerous he was to them in previous battles. And so they want him to back off. So they approach the king, and the king feels powerless to argue with them. So he goes to David and said, Listen, you got to go back. And David goes, Why? What have I done? I'm here. I'm ready to fight. And he's like, I appreciate that, and I value you, and I see that you've never done me wrong. You're like an angel of the Lord to me, but everyone else is unhappy with it. So what I want you to do is I want you to take you and all your fellas, and in the morning I want you to get up, and I want you to go back home. And guess what? It's exactly what David does. He really, and you can see, he really is committed to hanging out with the Philistines at this point. Like he has completely cut his allegiance to his people, and now his whole allegiance is to the Philistines, the enemy that is actually trying to destroy his people. And he goes right back to where they were, right back to the land of the Philistines, and then the Philistines go into battle. But I mean, it's just, I think this is a really sad picture, or I should say place in David's life, that he has gotten himself so far from where he should be. and it's just an ugly place. So anyway, that's all I gotta say. I'm gonna toss it over to Mr. Beal here, and I'll be right back. Give me 1 second. You're good,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, I'm fine. A couple things in the reading here that kind of reminded me of other things. I don't know if it reminded you of it. When the princes of the Philistines said in verse number 3, "Is not this David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel?" You know what that kind of reminded me of? When Jesus was arrested and Peter was there, and they were questioning Peter because people knew Peter had been with Jesus. And Peter, of course, had to, he felt the need to say, I don't know him. I don't know the man, and he denied Jesus 3 times. But it just, I guess the point that I wanted to bring out that, the unbelievers, the non-believers in life know where your allegiance is. They know where you belong. Sometimes Christians don't know where they belong. You ever been like that?
You're warm.
I'm fine. There, sometimes Christians they just wander around like they don't know where they're supposed to be. But the lost world knows. You ever go or see a Christian go into something or a place and everyone looks at them kind of funny, like you're not supposed to be here, kind of thing. I just think it's interesting sometimes that the lost world has more expectation, I guess, of a Christian than Christians do, kind of thing. I guess you were gone, you stepped out, and I just made the point where the princes of the Philistines said, "Is not this David?" And I compared it to when Jesus was arrested, and they were saying that to Peter. Is it weren't you with him? Weren't you with him? Kind of deal.
Yeah.
That people who are not believers know believers. Do you know what I mean? They know that there's something, and many times they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I remember I heard a story. A preacher told it. It was about weddings. When people want to get married, many times people need a preacher to lead in the ceremony. But so before the ceremony, everybody wants the preacher. You're welcome to come. You're the preacher.
Mm-hmm.
But after the ceremony and everyone wants to go to the reception and act a fool, they want the preacher to go. Mm-hmm. Because, many times as believers, we are only welcome so much. Mm-hmm. But there comes a time when, the lost world wants to like a splinter, take you out of their thumb, kind of thing. And that's really what I think is going on here. David is like a splinter in the thumb. Mm-hmm. And they don't want him.
I was thinking there's just like so many instances in my life that I can relate to this kind of thing, though, because I was thinking that like in high school, it's such a ridiculous story, but everybody wants to hang out with the cool kids, right? And I didn't really have a group of people I hung out with. Rick and I are both kind of loners, but I was different. He avoided all groups, and I just like to dabble in all the groups. I was never really like one in one. I just would, I'd talk to this group and I'd talk to that group, and but I didn't really feel like I was just in one. I was just kind of around everybody, right? So, and he just avoided everybody. but anyway, there's some kids that I remember being around, and because some of my other friends were with them, and they just never really were a fan of me. Just never really were. And honestly, I was a believer, but I wasn't walking in righteousness then by any means. I was really in a place of rebellion, very much like David. And so the truth of the matter is there are a lot of kids, times when I hung out with kids, and I had no business being around them. And they knew it better than I did. Mm-hmm. I was out here trying to fit in. And they knew better than I did. You don't belong here. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And so I kind of get that. I kind of get that in that regard. I think too, I think of that in other situations too, because Rick will tell you, I'm still the same person. I still like to talk to everybody. And a lot of times I meet people and I'm immediate like, we're going to be best friends. and, and a lot of times after a little bit, it's like, oh yeah, we have very different values. And so we can't be the kind of friends that I would normally like to be. I've learned a little bit better over the years. But I think that's the problem here with David is that he's really trying to be something that he's not. And everybody else knows he doesn't belong there, but he's still trying to force himself in because he's just determined that he is not going to be an Israelite.
Mm-hmm.
He refuses to be that. And so I do think a lot of kids do that though. I think a lot of kids who are believers, like they grew up in a Christian home and they know better. They get this little wild streak in them and they decide they're going to try to hang out with the bad crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, the bad crowd doesn't really want them. They know they don't fit in, but they really want to. They just want to be friends with everybody, and they end up not being a part of it. And the parents are like, whew. but the kids are really sad about it, but they don't really understand what the problem is. Just like David here doesn't understand. He's like, why? Aren't I a good guy? Like, no, you are fine, but
Mm-hmm.
you're not one of us. And he wasn't.
And you can kind of get why that would be weird though today, because you would be too worldly to get close to God's crowd that loves him and is walking with him.
Mm-hmm.
You're too worldly for that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a believer and you're walking that kind of a life, you're still too godly. Not that you are godly at the time if you're backsliding.
Christ.
Yeah, you're still light.
Mm-hmm. There's too much God in you.
Exactly. That's the point that I'm making, to get along with the lost world.
Mm-hmm.
So you're kind of in limbo.
Mm-hmm.
You're not fitting in with the church crowd, the believers, because you're making bad choices.
Mm-hmm.
But you know better.
Mm-hmm.
You belong to God, so you don't get along or fit in really with the lost crowd,
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't fit who you are as a believer. You're different now.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you call that? You call it lukewarm. And you got worse trouble than that. You can say, well, it's bad I'm not getting along with the church crowd, and that's bad. And you can say this lost crowd over here, they're rejecting me, almost being rude, hurting my feelings, and that you can say that's bad. But if you're a lukewarm believer, the Bible says in Revelation that the Lord wants to spew a lukewarm Christianity out of his mouth. Really is what it says. And so you're against the Lord, and he's not in favor of you.
Mm-hmm.
So the goal for the Christian life should be to commit.
Mm-hmm.
Commit to the Lord. You got saved, wonderful. Now you're alive, you're living, you're making choices, you're making decisions, you're doing stuff every day. Commit to the Lord and be what he wants you to be. David, even though he was living in a pagan land,
Mm-hmm.
was still very much what the Lord would have him to be.
Mm-hmm.
After all this time being in a pagan land, you think they could have pointed a finger at him.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny you're a Hebrew, David, because you're acting just like one of us. You and Goliath could have been best friends. That kind of
Imagine.
thing. And but that's but David never acted like that.
No,
he didn't, because it even says in that same verse that we're looking at, verse 3, it says, I have found no fault in him. Mm-hmm. And that reminds me of what Pilate said about Christ. Yeah. And Christ being the son of David.
Ella said, was it only Saul who didn't like David, or was it all the people? Really just Saul. Because when we see the people, they seem to be supportive of David. But I realize there are people who were reporting to Saul, but it seems like they were mostly doing it for favor, or, because he's the king and they feel like they have to. But it doesn't seem like people are hateful to David by any means. People seem to want to be helpful to him.
Yeah, especially Israel, I mean, they made up their little ditty.
She's talking about the people of Israel.
Oh, okay. Saul slew his thousands and David his 10,000s. I mean, they would sing it. David was an Old Testament hero to the people.
Well, then it was present day.
Yeah. I know what you're saying. I will say that perhaps there were some that turned.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Saul had servants that were obviously out to get David as well, but there were probably people in the nation that turned against David. David had been gone a while, and I hate to say it, but there are a lot of people in this world that don't think. If you say something, you blurt something out, many people will just believe it. You could work many years trying to build a good testimony for God, and then somebody come along and say something that's not even true, make up a lie about you, and there will be people that believe it just because it was said. And my point is that you have a king in a nation who's going on and on about David. No doubt there were probably people, I mean, of course it is guesswork, but there were probably groups of people in the nation that decided it's good he's gone. If you say something loud enough and long enough, people will believe it. I mean, look at Hitler and the Holocaust and all that. If you just say something loud enough and long enough, even if it's false, even if it's lies, even if it's absolute evil and wickedness, there will be people who give it consideration. Think, well, maybe,
Kelly said if the people liked or helped David, they paid the price. And Ella said, that's what I thought. So wouldn't they stand with him against Saul? And that goes back to what Kelly said. Remember the priests who helped David a little bit didn't even know that there was anything wrong with David and Saul at that point. And they were all killed. Surely that information got around. Surely some people heard about priests that were killed by Saul for helping David. So I imagine that probably deterred people from wanting to help David. In fact, there were some people, remember David had a band of people that had joined him, and they were all people who Saul had wronged, essentially. And so only the people who were like really trying to, go against Saul seemed to be brave enough, or like Saul's already against them, seemed to be brave enough to go hang out with David. Otherwise, they're just going to keep their distance and stay out of it, hope that they don't have any trouble from it. But yeah, so it's David, but that doesn't mean that remember the Lord had protected David over and over and over again. You know what I mean? There were so many opportunities where Saul possibly could have gotten him. Remember that one time that they had David surrounded, and then all of a sudden the Philistines came to battle and Saul had to take off and leave? And then there were the times that the Lord put Saul in David's hands. So the Lord had constantly protected David. And I think if David, I think this is more of a faith matter. If David had just trusted the Lord, if his heart was in the right place, then he could have withstood, and probably Saul would have been deposed by now, would be my guess. It's just a guess, but that's how I feel about it. But instead of just trusting the Lord and keeping on the right path, David's like, I'm done. I'm going to head on over here and I'm going to hang out with Achish. And I am now going to be Israel's enemy. and you understand, he's not Saul's enemy. He even had the opportunity to destroy Saul, and he would not. It's not that he's for whatever reason, and he's made Israel his enemy, right? It's just his mind is just so backwards in its thinking that he is not. He's completely separated himself from the people, and I'm sure this is Satan's work because. David is supposed to be their king. He should be having a heart of compassion for them. He really should be fighting for them. He should be with them. And instead, he's over here trying to avoid it, trying to avoid any of the difficulty. It's foolish on every part, as far as I'm concerned.
I have a thought.
I
But
can't wait to hear
no, I can't tell you because it's wrestling around in my head. It's just there. But it's not a full thought. You ever been like that?
Give me the pieces of it, and we'll talk about it.
Well, I'm all right. Well, I'm trying to compare David to Jesus,
Uh-huh.
and I don't even know what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
That's what makes it so good. But okay, so David was away, and Jesus has been away. We're waiting on his return. David was away so long that the people perhaps didn't want him, or at the very least, they weren't thinking of him anymore.
Mhm.
And you can say the same about the Lord. He's been away, and we've been awaiting his return for a long time now.
Mhm.
And it seems like the people every day grow colder,
Mhm.
not thinking of him
Mhm.
and not longing for his return.
Mhm.
That's just a similarity I was having.
Hmm.
The people's coldness toward David. You know, some of that's David's responsibility,
Mhm.
but some of it's also the people. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, I kind of get what you're saying, that the people, like even what Ellen was saying, that they hadn't really jumped up and demanded that David be respected.
Yeah, I'm not saying
That really wasn't their place. Either.
Yeah, I know. I'm not saying that. I'm not declaring any kind of revolutionary things like overthrow governments and things. Of course, I'm not saying that. But I'm saying when you see leadership doing things that are downright despicable toward people who love the Lord, following the Lord, and mean to do right, something needs to be said.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
the crowd that does wrong today, they never shut up.
Mhm.
But the crowd that stands for right and wants to do right, sometimes you can't get them to utter a word.
Mhm.
You know, and what's that saying? About you know what I'm saying about people that won't speak. Something about a good man. The way to I know I can't get it out, but something about the way to how does evil grow or something. When people say nothing or
yeah.
say it. Do you know it?
Yes, I do, but my mind is now going blank.
Okay.
I know what you're saying.
Do you even know enough words to look it up?
I'm fairly certain it was
somebody out there knows what I'm talking about.
Fairly certain it was Martin Luther King.
Was it? Quoting the king.
Mm-hmm. You can keep talking.
Well, I was see if you could find it. But anyway, I just see a lot of comparisons, and I think somebody that studied it out longer and really looked at it could probably see a lot more between David and the Lord. Not saying that David is the Lord, but there's pictures of David's life that are comparable
the only
to the
thing
Lord.
Necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing.
That's what I was going for. Now, who said it?
I'm looking.
I don't think it was Dr. King. I'm feeling like it was somebody from England. Is it an unknown quote? I know surely someone said it. Anyway, anything?
I'll tell you when I read it. They don't. It's not Martin Luther King, but it's been attributed to a lot of people, but they don't have a 100%.
Really?
On where it came from.
You know, that would happen to me. Finally, in my life, I would say something that was very wise and profound, and people would forget to write my name down, and they would it would just go on and on and on. I'd be like, nobody would. It's all right. It keeps me humble. Is that right? Because I was thinking him.
Yeah. No.
No,
I mean, he might have been one of the people it was attributed to, but they said that they can't be officially traced to any one person.
surely it wasn't Shakespeare.
All right. Kelly said, "I'd be cold if I felt betrayed because David went to the enemy." This might have been mentioned, but it's interesting that Achish called God Lord, showing maybe David had a spiritual impact on some of the Philistines while there. I don't think so. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but ultimately the Philistines still remain David's enemy, and David isn't really full of faith at this moment. He might have just been using the word.
Discouraged.
He might have just been using the word. He might have been referring to his God, but I mean, I'd have to look at the language to see how that worked. But Ellis said, "Not us. We'll remember you for don't." That was a classic right there. You know what's funny? I tell you what, I was listening to the Sabbath sermon today at this fellowship that I like to listen to. And they actually, believe it or not, and listen, this is something that I just watch online. They're semi-local, but they don't know who we are. They don't know that we do online Bible study. As far as I know, they don't know anything about what we do. So coincidence? Definitely not. Totally the Lord. I was watching the Sabbath service today, and do you know what they were talking about? They were talking about the Witch of Endor that we talked about last night. They were literally talking about that this morning. And I was listening to it, and he put on the screen, you know, he uses PowerPoint on the screen. And the very first slide was this big sign, and it said, "Don't." And it was so funny to me that, like, we literally just listen, you know, we were talking about that last night, and that was Rick's big main point. And then it was like, you know what I'm saying? It was the exact same thought process. I mean, what he actually preached on was a little bit different, but I just thought that it must have come from the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? All right.
Don't go with other groups, folks. Other groups, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that don't know the Lord. Here's a don't. They don't want you.
Mm-hmm.
They really don't. Somebody like me, you get saved a little later. Maybe you get saved in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s. And there were people that knew you before you got saved, and they see you in a store or something, and they say, "Why don't you come by?" You know, they get excited. They saw you, and now they want to see you again, talk to you, think it's going to be like old times. But the thing is that it may seem like it for a while to you and to them, but after a while, both of you are going to see that it's different now.
Something different.
You really don't belong with them anymore, and you know, vice versa. They don't belong with you because everything's changed now. Christ changes things. If nothing's changed, then did Christ ever come in your life? Are you saved? Because if you're saved tonight, you can say, "Hey, you know what, Rick? I know what you're talking about. Things changed when I got saved. I'm not perfect. You know, I still sin, and we all do, but things are different now. You know, I used to sin and not even think about it. Just whatever. If it felt good, I'd do it, you know. But now, I mean, I still sin, but you know what happens afterwards? The joy is the happiness from it. The gratification's gone. I feel miserable. I feel sick about it. What is that? That's the Holy Spirit in me convicting me that it doesn't fit who I am in Christ. You probably experience that. I'm sure you do if you're a believer. You can still sin like you used to, but it's not the same thrill it used to be. Come on, BB. The thrill is gone. You know, it's gone, and it's gone for the believer. He can't. He and she can't sin anymore in the same way. Let me say it like that. You can maybe do the same things, but you can't enjoy it. That flesh is now at war with the spirit, and the spirit's going to win. You know, I think David was trying to lie and fool himself.
Mhm.
Maybe he was trying to ignore it. Maybe he was trying to act like it's no big deal. But it was a big deal, and everyone knew it. And the sad thing is, if I could say something was sad, that David wasn't the first one to say, "Hey, you know what? I don't belong here. I gotta go. Come on, guys, pack up your stuff, get your gear. We're going." But it's not the way it went down. You know, the lost crowd decided to say, "Hey, send this guy on his way," kind of deal.
It's funny to me. Oh, and I do want to say I did look it up, Jess, and you took it off. Why? You were right.
Churchill.
No, I hadn't looked at it really closely, but you're right. It was the all caps Lord, which is Yahweh.
Oh,
So it wasn't referring to Achish as king by any means. But I still don't believe at all that he was all of a sudden a believer. You know what I mean? He's still at odds with God's people, and I just don't think that that's a possibility. Could he be using the term? Could David have influenced him with the term? I mean, we live in the South. You're in Maryland, so technically the South, but trust me, not the same, because we've lived in Maryland, we moved here. It's very, very different. But here, everybody uses God language. Everybody says, "Bless your heart" and "Praise the Lord," and they can even maybe quote some Bible verses, but that doesn't mean that they are, believers by any means. By any means, there's just something in the language and being around it and being influenced by it. And so perhaps you're right. Perhaps there was an influence in terms of that, but I don't think he influenced him in terms of faith. Do you know what I mean? I don't think all of a sudden Achish was becoming a believer. I just don't think he was at that point ever.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
I don't. It doesn't say necessarily here, so it is impossible to actually know for sure who's in heaven and who's not. Sometimes we don't know. We'll know when we get there. But I agree with you about some things about that. Like it says about the devils, demons. They know God. They tremble.
They know who he is. Yeah.
Right. So I'm saying that it's like George Washington. George Washington.
You could have just as easily said it's like a pickle. Like, I mean, you just always throw out some random thing.
I needed a proper name. It's like, I mean, I can say, I can believe that there is, or should I say was, a George Washington. And I can speak about him, and use his proper name and call him President Washington. Doesn't mean that, I am trusting in him at all. Do you follow what I'm saying? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
You can address somebody and talk and speak of somebody without truly believing in that person, trusting in that person. There's a lot of folks in the Bible who have mentioned the Lord and didn't actually trust in him. Pharaoh was one with Moses. Pharaoh didn't say that there is no God of the Hebrews, but he didn't trust in him, that kind of thing. And I think that's similar to what's going on here. I think if anything, we have a fella here who acknowledges that there is a God over Israel, but it's not necessarily his God, that kind of thing. And I think that's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, like we could use the word Baal, which was his name. Well, that doesn't mean we believe in him.
Right.
Did you know that's his name?
Good point. I chose George Washington to make the same point.
But here, look, I want to just say something about this one thing. Okay. David, when he talks to Achish, he's upset. He's like, what have I done? What have you found in me unto this day? And this is what he says, that I can't go fight the enemies of my Lord, my King. And again, I just think this really tells you where David's heart is in this moment. And I know you say he's discouraged, but this is out and out rebellion. And you got to remember, what's rebellion like? It's as the sin of witchcraft. So at this point, he is just as bad as Saul, in that he is talking about God's people, not even referring to them by their name, saying they're his enemies. Or maybe not saying they're his enemies, but saying that they're the enemies of his Lord, his King. You know what I mean? And it's like he has gotten really far from where he needs to be, that he's seeing the people who actually would love him and value him as the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then he's over here wanting to fight the people who value him and love him because he wants to be on the side of the person who wants to destroy them. Like, it's just the idea of not even saying, he wouldn't even say the Israelites. He doesn't say anything. He just says that he's offended that he can't go fight against the enemies of his Lord, the King.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, I think that's so telling as to David's heart in that moment, that he is just, he's gotten totally mixed up. And granted, I'll give you this. I think it's very easy at a difficult time in your life to get mixed up and to think that the people who really are your enemies are your friends, and the people who really are your friends are your enemies. I mean, this is what happens to teenagers. Teenagers get to that point when they get all, testosterone and everything, and they want to just be their own men. And it's like, I'm not going to listen to you, mom and dad. All of a sudden, mom and dad become their enemy. And all of a sudden, all these people over here, they're the ones who they're really on their side. And they want to fight with their parents who really love them and who really do anything for them, to be on the side of these other people over here. And they've gotten backwards, Spouses get this way. You can get up in arms. I told you before about the woman that we were doing a Bible study, and she had an issue with her husband, and it was a financial issue. But she had these girlfriends over here, and the girlfriends were like, girl, you should leave him. Girl, you don't need to put up with all of that. You should just get on out. And praise the Lord, she is a godly lady and did not do that. She was like, no, we're going to work this out and it'll be fine. The Lord really worked in their marriage. Let me just tell you. But there are a lot of women who would be like, you are right. You are right. I don't deserve that. I need to leave him. How dare he? And just like, and really, okay, so the husband messed up their finances. All right. He messed up their finances. They could certainly work that situation. It was a difficult financial situation. I'm not saying it wasn't. He was selfish. He was foolish. And there was a lot of struggle that she had to go through because of his foolishness. And I totally understand that. But she also couldn't get herself mixed up and forget, this person is on my team. And these people are on their own team. They have no idea what's going on over here. So, you know what I mean? It's like, you really have to remember, because a lot of times you get friends, and I think it happens to men too. Men got their buddies. Like, man, you don't need to listen to that stuff. How she shouldn't be talking to you like that. Right? They don't know. But the whole idea is that, you can listen to different groups of, it's always friends. It's like the teenagers, they're friends, spouses with their friends, maybe in your workplace, whatever it is. The whole idea is that you've got to remember who's on your actual team.
Yeah.
The people who are for you. And don't get distracted by everything else. And David has gotten so distracted that he's made the right people his enemies and his enemies his friends. And it is just a mistake. And this is just the first evidence of it, that they're kicking him out. You should have known it by now.
Big difference in David's between this one and David when he stood at the time of Goliath and he said, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine?"
Exactly.
You know, here's a young man with a strong heart of faith in the God of heaven, who would stand eyeball to eyeball with a giant. And now you have David who's really running. You know, he's not. It's not like he's in the cave, but he's still running in his heart.
He's still in a cave.
And he's clinging to people who are not the people he ought to be with. Okay. But I'll say this. I'll apply it to today. Sometimes people go to church for a while and then something happens. They get out of church. They get away from Christians. They go to work a job. They start hanging around people who are not Christians. And they start to dabble in things that are not godly.
Christ-like.
And even though they are sincerely a believer, they are so filled with flesh and sin, and now they have a disdain for the church, and almost like it's the church's fault, when it's really who changed. It was the person who said, I'm going to go hang out with the lost people. And again, I'm not putting down lost people. Lost people need to get saved, but they don't have the same values God's people have. And it's not a pride matter. It's a godly matter. We belong to the Lord, and we need to live like the Lord. And but sometimes we can get away from believers and start to think that, we don't need them. But God knows that we need each other. I mean, we do. We do need each other. I'm not saying there's no magic number. I'm not saying you need 100 believers around you at all times, but you need a few. You need a few Christians in your life that you can go to when you're having a hard time. And you need a few Christians in your life so when they're going through a hard time, they can come to you. You really you need that. We all need that. And I hope you get it if you don't have it already. You can find it here. I know this is online and it's not quite the same thing as a face-to-face deal, but I mean, in hard times, we're all here, right, for one another. So that's good. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves that God's people are our people, and that we are part of the same family. And there was a preacher that he's a teacher in Bible college, and he said he had a sermon. I never heard it preached, but it was about ornery Christians, and it was called "These Sheep Bite," kind of thing. And it was just about how sometimes Christians, they get out of sorts and they start to act ornery, and it does have an effect on everybody in the church. You say you can't sin and think you're the only one that's going to affect. It affects everybody. David was God's man to be the next leader, and he should have been stepping up and each day getting more and more mature, heading for that role. But at this point in his life, it's like he's let go of the wheel, kind of thing. And I'm not trying. And listen, my life has never been threatened like his was. So I'm not gonna throw stones at David. He went through a lot for a long time. I mean, to have a king, a leader with great power, hunting you down like you're a little rabbit, and he's got his hounds after you. That had to do something with your thinker in your heart. But still, David was not alone. He knew the God of heaven. And like I've said before, you and God make the majority. And he did not have to backslide like he did.
Kelly said, "Didn't David still fight Israel's enemies? Why he didn't take prisoners?" Yes, he did. And this goes back to what Rick said earlier about him being lukewarm. He's very back and forth. You know, we've talked about in James where it says a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. And this is why David wasn't ready for leadership at this moment, because he is back and forth. On one hand, he's basking in all of the benefits of being close to the king of the uncircumcised Philistines, as he says. But then at the same time, he will go fight Israel's enemies, and then he'll go right to the battle to fight Israel, offended that he can't be a part of it. When we actually get to tomorrow's chapter, he fights again in such a way that helps Israel. But it's like, you can see that it's like, it's the back and forth. He's not really committed to Israel at this point, because it's like, yeah, okay, so he fights here and he fights there and he helps them and he does this and he does that. But at the same time, he knows his brethren are being killed out in the battlefield and he's not doing anything to help them. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's half-hearted. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
You know that they're hurting. You know that they need help. And yet you're going to stand by and do nothing? Like, that doesn't seem right either.
Mhm.
So he's just very lukewarm. He's back and forth. He, on one hand, it's like the, you know, we were talking earlier about like kids who, you know, get defiant with their parents or whatever when they're teenagers. You know, something happens. Their parents need something. You know what I mean? They'll probably jump in and help their parents. But then the second their parents try to tell them no about something, then all of a sudden they're like, I hate you. They want to go hang out with their friend. You know what I mean? It's like when it actually comes down to having a relationship and doing things the right way, then they don't want that. You know? And that's kind of where David is. When it actually comes to being what he needs to be there, he doesn't really want to do that right now. You know, he doesn't want to deal with Saul. He doesn't want to deal with all the troublesome things. He just wants to have his peace in the countryside at Philistia and just relax. Right. But he, at the same time, you know, if something happens over here, he'll help him. Right. But you know what I'm saying? It's like, he's not really committed. And it's just, yeah. Jess said, it's nice God can even use your enemy's war illness to steer you on the right path. I mean, ultimately, the Lord had chosen David. And David was going to be who the Lord said he was going to be. And, you know, David's life could have been different. You know, he ultimately was in the same position as Saul. And Saul could have had the benefits that David had. You know what I mean? The Lord chose Saul. And then Saul was rebellious, so that got taken away from him. And now David has this opportunity. The Lord chose him. He's going to be king. The Lord's already said it. But just as easily, he could have just totally messed it up, and the Lord said, nope, taking it from you. So, I mean, you know, it could have happened that way, but it didn't, because David ultimately did become a man after God's own heart. But it doesn't seem like he's in that place right now. But maybe the Lord's given him some grace because he is still, you know, he's still learning. Yeah.
Always value God's people. And know this, that God has a calling for everybody. And a person may live in rebellion for so long that they never fulfill that calling. Maybe even one day the Lord takes it back. Says, I wanted to use you, but you chose another path.
Well, like Jonah, if he hadn't repented,
right,
he would have gone down in the way.
But I'm going to say this, that even though I see, and I say that because we don't tell God what to do. God tells us. So I'm not going to say that God won't take back a calling, because it's very possible God will take back a calling if a person doesn't answer. But many times what will happen is God has a calling on your life, and we should just hop to it and obey. But many times we draw it out, sometimes years. And the Lord continually works on our heart, trying to get our attention, to help us to realize that this calling is not just some
optional.
Yeah, and it's not just some, dream that you had, but this is really your Creator and Savior's calling on your life. Now obey. It's a big deal. I mean, we get a letter from the IRS, we treat it like it's a big deal. I mean, there's a lot of things that we treat as a big deal. You know, the blue lights come on, you get a ticket, it's a big deal. The Lord speaks to your heart, and you know that God has a specific calling on your life. No one's going to talk you out of it. You know that God has dealt with you, and this is what he wants you to do. Just do it. But many of us will go, we're busy right now, kind of thing. And folks, God's not going to change his mind. Lots of times he won't. He's going to stay on it. Now, the best thing to do is just let him have it. God had a calling on David, and David was really making it harder on himself than he had to here. But if I could give you some encouragement, I'll say this, that even though David was not maybe 100% here what he should be, he still becomes king. The Lord still uses him in a great way. So I'm thankful tonight that the Lord is patient with us. He knows that sometimes it just takes us a long time to get with the program. I wish it didn't, but many times it does. And I'm glad that I'm glad that God puts callings on all of our lives. And I'm glad that he's patient with us while we seek to find that calling. Okay. Somebody out there right now may be thinking, well, the Lord did call me to do something, but I haven't done it. And there's been years now. And I just feel empty about the whole thing. And what should I do? Tell the Lord about it and get busy doing it. I mean, it's just that simple. All right, it's been years. If the calling, if you're sure it's still there, then do it now. David was not the king here. He was living in a pagan land, getting ready to fight on the wrong side of the fence. But you know what? Skipping ahead a little bit, the Lord still makes him king. The Lord is not done with all of us, or any of us, I should say. You could be a total backslider right now, and you can get right with the Lord before you go to bed tonight and wake up tomorrow to see a brand new day where you can serve the Lord. And even though you may be running from the Lord now for 10 years, starting tomorrow, starting at the very moment you get right with God, you can experience a whole new life and walk. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but it is true. I'm not just trying to come up with something to say. God has a calling on all of our lives, and we need to be busy figuring out what that calling is and obeying it. You know, we're not here by accident, and we're only here for a short time. So you don't want to waste time doing things that don't matter when the Lord has put you here to do things that do matter for eternity, matter for him. David had a lot of work to do for the Lord, things that mattered. And at the moment in this chapter here, he's obviously against what the Lord would want. He's not in prayer here. The Lord has not said, you know what, David, stay in the land of my enemies. That's not what's going on here. David is driving the car of his life, and he's not giving it over to the Lord yet. I'm rambling, but I'm done.
Well, then we can be done for the night. A little early for us, but not really early.
Oh, it's right at an hour.
Anyway, all right. Well, tomorrow.
I'll make sure I pray for a minute.
Tomorrow, we will see David go back the other direction. And he will actually fight a battle for and with the Lord.
Yeah.
And you can see the positive effects of when you are actually where you should be.
Yeah. Because folks, understand that David was still used of the Lord in a great way. He's already been used of the Lord. David will see a lot of highs and lows. He's already seen them. This is past now. But this is David's life right now, and it's up and down, just like Moses kind of had that. Everybody's had that. So we're not perfect. David was not perfect. We're not going to be perfect, but what we can be is faithful. And when you fall, when you make mistakes, and that's a gentle way of saying when you sin before God, get right with him. Don't try to cover it. You can't sin and win. You have to get right with the Lord. Otherwise, you're just going to waste time that the Lord has given you to do great things for him. Okay? So we really do have a choice. That's that free will of man. The Lord is in control, but he's given us time and he's given us a choice. We can serve the flesh or we can serve the spirit. Now, if we serve the spirit, there's great reward. There's great promise to the one who serves the Lord with the life that God has given them. But there's also great emptiness and really a wasted existence for the one who just sows to the flesh kind of deal. And I know that's a whole different thought, but just follow the Lord. Follow the Lord. I've said a lot, but I hope I made a point there somewhere that you caught. God's not done with any of us. None of us have arrived or attained anything. We're all work in progress, and we need to just keep striving, keep going in a good direction, following the Lord, and the Lord will do great things with you every day. Lord, thank you for tonight, and I pray that things that we said tonight during this short chapter really meant something to someone out there, that they'll take something that they heard tonight and it really be challenged to walk with you closer. I pray that someone's walk will be more genuine. If there's someone out there tonight and they're spending time with people that they ought not to spend time with, I pray that you'll move their heart to make better decisions. And I pray that we would all be unified as a group. I pray that Christians would become closer in a day where it's just getting darker and darker. Lord, I just pray that all of us would just seek you and love you more and serve you in a greater way. We thank you for all that you do, Lord. And we pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
All right, everyone. Come back tomorrow. And like I said, we will continue in 1 Samuel. We're just about done with the book.
Yeah.
We'll see you guys next time.
Bye. Good night, folks.